Hello, dude and dudettes. It's me, E.H. Ivins, and this is another episode of The Radical Reset, the home of Antipolitism. What we're going to talk about today is war, and it is possible, in fact, in my opinion, it is probable that we are preparing for a new world war, but it'll be unlike any world war we've ever seen before. And when history looks back at this period, it's going to wonder how the hell we missed all the warning signs that were coming on. Now, what brings this to mind this week is the massive hack of the United States government by allegedly, and I believe this to be true, the Russian government through a backdoor software glitch in a program sold by a small company that actually sells a lot of the security type software to the US government and other companies around the country called SolarWind. Let me make clear, SolarWind, which I believe is headquartered in Texas, is not an agent of the Russian government as far as we know at this time. It has simply had a backdoor in its software, a glitch that weirdly enough we knew about 2 years ago. It was not fixed, they're in, and the problem is horrible. Now, when I say it's horrible, you're probably saying to yourself right now, I heard about this backdoor invasion, I heard about this glitch, and I heard about this cyber intrusion, but I don't see the government freaking out. When they don't talk about it, it's terrible. So they've been going around from one governmental leader to another, from Pelosi to Schumer to McConnell to McCarthy to Trump to O'Brien, the security advisor, everybody. And everybody is zipped up really, really tight. They acknowledge that the hack took place, but they won't acknowledge the scope of it or the extent of the damage. This means it's fucking terrible. Now, in the scope of that, here we are in the 21st century, and we've got this massive military, and we prepare for global military conflicts when I think that we're preparing for the wrong war. I'm not saying that we don't need a military, but I'm saying that we need to re-examine for the 21st century what the mission of that military is, and we also have to determine when the line is crossed when we declare war. Now, this invasion of our governmental cybersecurity systems, including the Department of Energy, which oversees the United States nuclear stockpile. And let me stop here just for one moment and point out, why does the Department of Energy keep track of the United States nuclear stockpile? A classic example of bureaucratic overreach. The Department of Energy has no purpose. It was established I think it was 1976, I could be wrong by a year, by President Carter. That I'm positive about. The idea was to develop more energy because he thought that we were running out, which seems laughable in 2020 hindsight given the glut of oil and natural gas that's on the world market today, but I digress. Now, he established the Department of Energy. It quickly became clear under the presidency of President Reagan that it was superfluous. But Reagan failed to shut it down, and once a government program starts, it's almost impossible to shut down because they take onto themselves things to make themselves important. In this case, the Department of Energy is watching the nation's nuclear stockpile. Nuclear weapons have nothing to do with energy, my friends. Nuclear, the word nuclear, there are nuclear power plants, but they have nothing to do with nuclear weapons. That the Department of Energy is overseeing the nuclear weapons is simply a case of finding a reason to exist. The same reason why the Department of Commerce is the home of the National Weather Service. Now you might, and the National Oceanographic Service too, by the way. You might be asking yourself, what does oceanography and weather have to do with commerce? Not a fucking thing. Once again, a useless department designed to help the competitiveness of American industry as if they couldn't advertise for themselves without the government getting involved at all, and taking on things like weather and, oceanography that have not a fucking thing to do with what they were originally chartered to do, but this is how they justify their existence on an ongoing basis. But I digress. Back to the point at hand. Now, our military, in the last century fought 2 major world wars, which we in fact caused, which is going to be important and pertinent to this discussion today as to when we declare war. Because we have declared war for a whole lot less than what went on this week. And now let me be specific about that. In 1917, we entered World War I, and the war was over by 1918. The United States tipped the war. Without the United States entering the war, the Allied powers, Britain and France primarily, would have fought to a stalemate against Germany and Turkey, and the world would have been a much different place. I say that because World War II was nothing but a continuation of World War I. Had the United States not come in on the side of the so-called Allied powers in World War I to defeat Germany, then the Versailles Treaty would have never taken place with its horrible punitive sanctions against Germany. No Versailles means no Hitler. No Hitler means no Nazis. No Nazis mean no World War II. No World War II means no Holocaust. Not to mention the fact that the Russians would never have taken all of Eastern Europe as their sphere of influence, nor taken over parts of Japan on the Pacific, and World War II would have been completely avoided. World War I and II, and the Holocaust, and the approximately, and much of what the communists did. And Mao would have never taken power. The Japanese would have crushed him. To make a long story short, there would be 80 to 100 million people alive from the 20th century, and all of their descendants by now, which would be, I don't know, exponentially more than that, all because we entered World War I. And why did we enter World War I, which is what's pertinent to this discussion today? Two reasons. In 1915, a German U-boat sunk the so-called passenger liner Lusitania. At the time, the Lusitania was the fastest passenger liner fastest ship in the world because it ran turbine engines. Its turbine engines could carry it at the blinding speed of those days of 25 knots, which is still a pretty good clip for a large ship, even today, but in those days it was positively racing. The Lusitanians, and it also had a sister ship, the Mauretania, which came a little bit later. It was sunk, and the Germans claimed it was sunk because it was carrying munitions to England from the United States secretly. The United States and Britain denied this for many, many decades, but it turns out that it's true. The Lusitania was a munition ship disguised as a passenger ship. We were essentially doing what ISIS does and using human shields to protect a ship, and that didn't work, and that caused the United States, the public, to turn against Germany because they were unaware of what was going on behind the scenes and the ammunition that was aboard the Lusitania. And then 2 years later, we entered the war. The excuse that we used at the time, and this is another flimsy excuse, was a cable from Germany, from the Kaiser, or one of the Kaiser's diplomats, I should say, the equivalent of Secretary of State, to Mexico, asking Mexico to invade the United States and then share in the spoils of war upon the defeat of the United States later. Well, here's the deal, Pickle. The whole idea was to cut off British arms to cut off arms coming from the United States to Britain. The idea was to scare the United States into a war it was the dumbest fucking idea. I'm not even going to go into it. It was such a dumb idea. Even at the time, people thought it was dumb. People who had a brain in their head thought it was dumb. Why was it dumb? Because in 1915, we had sent General Pershing into Mexico with 10,000 troops to root out Pancho Villa, unsuccessfully, I might add, but basically whipped the Mexican troops from one side to the other. They fought us too. We fought to a little bit of a standstill, and General Pershing withdrew. But Mexico was in no condition to be carrying out a major land war with the United States. The whole thing was absurd. Mexico was never going to attack the United States, and the United States... Wilson, who was a devious motherfucker and a real piece of shit, used this as his excuse to tell the American public it was time to enter World War I. It was just an excuse. As I said, the Lusitania was a justified sinking on the part of the Germans, and the whole bullshit story about the Mexican cable. Mexico, come on. Doesn't that sound just stupid as fuck to you now? And it sounded just as stupid as fuck back then. Okay, now, I share all that because that's the flimsy excuse we used to get into World War I, leading to the 100 million deaths of the century. Again, if we had not entered the war, we fought to a standstill. And by the way, for those of you who think I'm being a German apologist, let me point out a couple of things. The first thing, in case you guys don't know it, those of you who watch me regularly, I think, do, I'm Jewish, so I am the furthest thing from a Nazi sympathizer. But Germans are not Nazis, and the Germans of World War II were not Nazis. A very different regime. The Kaiser may not have been our favorite king, but he was the furthest thing from a Nazi, and he was no different in the good or bad category than his Aunt Victoria, the Queen of England at the time, okay, or well, not at the time, but just before World War I. To make a long story short, and he was the cousin of King George of England at the time, it was a bunch of inbred royal families slugging it out over dying empires, and we had no fucking dog in that hunt, but we ended up causing the conflagration of the 20th century. Now, so what happened this week, bringing it to the present, was much more serious in a much more real way. If the Russians, or whoever it might be, the Chinese or whoever, can infiltrate and attack the United States infrastructure in this way, it's a small leap to imagine them shutting down the power grid, the communications grid. This is nothing less. What happened this week and I'm going to say it's the Russians, but we'll wait and see what comes out, but ostensibly by the Russians, is nothing short of an invasion of the United States by a foreign power. And we need to talk amongst ourselves and have the debate, a serious debate, not a partisan bullshit debate, not a leftist, rightist, bullshit, woke, afraid to tell the truth, afraid to say what's what kind of debate like we seem to have these days, but a real debate over what's the threshold for war. Where do we declare war? And do we declare, what kind of war do we declare? So I have a couple of suggestions. And these are anti-political suggestions. Again, things that aren't going to happen unless we have an anti-politics government. For those of you who need a quick review on what anti-political government is, it is democracy by selection, not election, eliminating all elections in favor of selecting our Congress and presidents, much as we do juries. It's much more detailed than that. It's all spelled out in a Radical Reset, the Manifesto of Antipolitism, which, if I may take a short moment, you can pick up. The link will be below. Get it on Amazon. You can either buy the paperback copy, download it to your Kindle, or if you're a Prime member, and I assume that almost everybody is, you can read it for free. Every time you turn the page, even when you're reading it for free in the Kindle Lending Library, I'm getting paid, and that helps support this podcast and the movement of antipolitism. So please pick up your copy of A Radical Reset and understand what antipolitism is. But what it does is it makes good government possible because there will be no political parties, for one thing, in an anti-political government. So to have a serious discussion, well, I think we have to get rid of political parties because they're incapable of serious discussion in the present time. All of that said, let's pretend we're in an anti-political government. We're having a rational discussion. We're talking about where's the threshold for war. Now, war doesn't necessarily mean you've got to get your head out of the 20th century and before. What I'm talking about is cyber warfare and how to do it. So what I suggest that the United States government would do is to not form a new bureaucracy or agency, but through the Department of Defense, one of the only 4 departments that in an anti-political government would survive at the cabinet level. The 4 departments that would survive at cabinet level, by the way, would be Department of Defense, Treasury, the Attorney General, and the Department of State to conduct foreign policy. But other than that, all the other departments would either be wound down to 0 or very close to it and reduced to minor, as they should be, departments of the government doing minor things and not the massive waste of trillions of dollars that we don't have that goes on now. But I digress. Back to the subject at hand. Now, through the Department of Defense, rather than form a whole new space force like Trump did, which is just absurd, and where, I'm not talking about missile defense here, I'm talking about cyber attacks, I would instead farm it out through the Department of Defense to a series of private vendors, and not one. I would diversify it. Diversity means 2 things. Number 1, you don't put all your eggs in one basket, so you have many different options. And number 2, you get lots more creativity. And I would farm it out to the private sector, to cybersecurity firms, to develop an offensive attack plan against all American potential enemies worldwide. So Russians, Chinese, and to a lesser extent North Koreans, Cubans, Venezuelans, and the list goes on. Okay, but let's just primarily China and Russia, to develop an offensive strategy to be unleashed on the command of the President of the United States upon a declaration of war by Congress after it's requested by the President of the United States, or clandestinely by the President of the United States, depending on what the situation is. We need to be able to respond massively in a cyber counterattack and in a way that's generally untraceable to the government so it doesn't escalate into a shooting war. The trick of this is going to be to determine where an act of war takes place, and invading our country's cyber system is an act of war, in my belief. And then an appropriate retaliation, which should be disproportionate to the invasion by the enemy. So since the enemy has attacked us through the GRU, the current version of the KGB, and by the way, as a side note, if those of you are wondering why I know so much about Russia, I was a Russian linguist and analyst for the National Security Agency in a previous life, and I still speak fluent Russian, so I know what I'm talking about, I promise. So having said that, they're doing it through the GRU, which is or is it the GRU these days? Or no, the FSB, I'm sorry. The GRU was the military arm that was conjunction with KGB in those days. The FSB, the State Security Service in Russia now, is the equivalent of that. Anyway, they have a division that's carrying out these attacks on the United States. The thing is, they're a bureaucracy like any other, and they're being carried out. And the only reason they're being successful is because they're carrying out against another government, and all governments are fucked up and inefficient. by their very nature. Bureaucracy is fucked up and inefficient because it has no incentive to be anything else. If we farm this out to vendors, to private industry, again, with security clearances to make sure we're dealing with trustworthy people that are involved, and we devote significant resources to it, and in these resources are intellectual resources. So what I would do is basically have these private companies have the kind of budget where they can go out and recruit from across the country, and I'm not going to say it from college campuses, because some of the most brilliant hackers don't go to school because their minds are too creative and too out there to go there. But we recruit the most brilliant hackers, even the black hat hackers from around the world, and we pay them whatever it takes to go to work for our private companies to develop and game plan the retaliation to bring anyone who would attack us to our knees. We've got a lot of talent out there, and unleashed by private industry and enough money so that they can get rich doing it. And really, that's what I'm talking about. So I'm saying basically, let's talk about this realistically. When we went in and we invaded Afghanistan, which we're still sitting in, we have now spent nearly $2 trillion on a war we haven't won and are probably going to withdraw, declare peace, and lose it like Vietnam. A blind man could see the Taliban is just itching to get back in. Now, and we've spent nearly $2 trillion. Now, a trillion is 1,000 billions, okay? Or 1,000,000 millions. A trillion is 1,000,000 millions. Now, the reason I point that out is we could hire the top, when I say we, private industry could hire the top 1,000, let's say, most brilliant white and black hat hackers in the United States, or from around the world, as long as they have a solid background, or from a country where we can check their background and are a U.S. ally. We don't have to restrict this. Let's get out of this 19th century idea that we can't trust anybody that's not from America. We have allies like England and Israel, for example, who are going to be our allies no matter what. Germany is another example, and where we can recruit this kind of talent, and we could pay them $1 million a month. Let's think about that. We could take the 1,000 best hackers in the world, recruit them, pay them $1 million a month, plus we could allow them to loot when they do attack and take whatever they want, and money's immaterial. 1,000 times 1,000 would be $1 billion a month. 1,000 thousands is $1 billion. Is it $1 billion? Wait a minute. 1,000 millions is $1 billion. So we could pay these 1,000 guys $1 million a month. That's $1 billion a month. That's only a $12 billion program. That's a pimple on the ass of the government and the kind of money. They're talking about another $1 trillion COVID relief bill that's not going to relieve shit. I'm talking about $12 billion. Would buy 1,000 top hackers in the world at $1 million a month to do nothing but spend their time game planning how to counterattack, which they'll just jazz on, and destroy the infrastructure of any enemy. And they'll be superior to any enemy because they're coming from the private sector. Profit is not a dirty word when it comes to efficiency. Profit is what creates efficiency. So what we need to do is, at a governmental level, determine where the threshold is for counterattack, and give the president and the Congress the tools they need to carry out a counterattack. And in an anti-political government where they wouldn't need to run for re-election, they wouldn't have to publicize it and fuck it up the way, for example, Barack Obama fucked up the killing of Osama bin Laden. Now, why do I say he fucked that up? Because if you'll recall, he announced it the day of the attack. So we sent in our SEAL team into Pakistan. And by the way, if you want to watch a wonderful movie, I'm not sure if I've seen on YouTube how it's supposed to be pretty accurate. It does have some figures that are not real people, but are straw people set up to, including the central character played by Jessica Chastain. But anyway, Zero Dark 30 is a terrific movie that tells the story of the killing of Osama bin Laden. And I am a huge Jessica Chastain fan, so I just recommend it on top of that. But anyway, the point is, Obama couldn't wait to announce to the world, even though you'll recall at the end of that movie, they did what they should do. They basically grabbed all the hard drives and all the computer and all the files and everything they could grab out of Obama's compound in Pakistan and brought it back with them. But the minute it was announced, it was rendered worthless. Okay, because Obama put politics over security. He couldn't wait to tell the fucking... what he could have done, we've been looking for the fucker for a few years. He could have kept his fucking mouth shut and given a month or 2 or 3 while we went through the intelligence and don't announce to the fucking world. Now, you might say, but of course Al Qaeda is going to know that Osama bin Laden's dead. Yeah, but they're never going to admit it, nor they're going to admit what's taken. And they're a bureaucracy like any other. And by the time they got it all organized, we'd have killed shit tons more of those motherfuckers with the information that we took. Instead, our president, for political reasons, chose to render it worthless. But an anti-political president who didn't have to stand for re-election and couldn't stand for re-election and could never serve beyond the term that he or she is serving would be able to simply do the right thing. And the right thing needs to be debated. I'm not here to tell you what that threshold is, but I think what we saw in the last week, when they don't talk about it, you know it's bad. When they hack into our defense network, that's an act of war. What else do they need to do? Land troops in fucking Manhattan? Stop thinking like it's the 20th century and before. Think like the 21st. We have to develop a 21st century capability, and we can best do it through the private sector, not through the public sector. And I don't even know what the argument, well, I guess the argument would be there should be profit in war or some bullshit like that. Or, can we trust a private company not to take over America? It's just such bullshit. These are all red herring arguments that come out of Hollywood and dark thrillers of a dystopian future that will never happen. Okay, just sit back and relax, particularly in an anti-political world. So, to sum up, we were invaded this week, probably by Russia. We have no ability to retaliate in the way that we should. Oh, I'm sure we're going to retaliate, and I'm sure we're going to do the best we can, but it's going to be one fucked up bureaucracy against another fucked up bureaucracy. But imagine if we recruited, just hypothetically, and maybe it's the top 10, what does it matter? Top 10,000, the greatest hackers, white and black hat in the world, pay them whatever it takes. I said $1 million a month. It wouldn't matter if it was $10 million a month each. The money, in terms of governmental, what it wastes is the best money we ever spent, because we're spending it on intellectual property. We're getting the best and the brightest. We're leaving them free to explore where they want to go. And when the president and what they do is basically video game it, just game it and game it and game it and game it and come up with a strategy so that, for example, if President Trump had a brain in his head, which he doesn't, but let's pretend that we had an anti-political president, and let's pretend this attack took place this week. Quietly, the anti-political president would then consult with the leaders of Congress to make sure everybody was on the same page. They wouldn't declare war because they wouldn't want to telegraph the attack that was coming. The declaration of war doesn't have to come at all in a cyber attack if you do it right. And by laying it off to private industry, we gain deniability. And we'll just do what the Russians do. Sit there and just, no, it wasn't us. I don't know who did it. I don't know. It could have been. I mean, and what are they going to do? I mean, with the kind of capability I'm talking about, there won't be anything left for them to do because we would massively retaliate. We would destroy the Russian, for example, electric grid this week just to tell them that don't fuck with us. And we could do it to anybody, any lesser country. North Korea is probably the safest country from this because they're so fucking backwards, but we could still do a number on North Korea, bring them to their fucking knees. And we can do it electronically, okay? Now, our conventional military, I'm going to leave that subject for another day, but I will tell you that I covered it extensively in A Radical Reset, the Manifesto of Antipolitism, which I mentioned earlier and you can pick up. But that's where I'm going to leave it today. I don't want to go on and on and on. We've had an active war. It's more important than anything else going on, and no one's paying attention to it. The reason they're all denying it is because it's so terrible that they don't want to talk about it. And take it from me, a former top secret code word clearance, presidential level, Russian linguist of the National Security Agency. I know what I'm talking about. I'm telling you this is worse than any of us know, and I can tell by the reactions of the government, which is to basically pretend like it's not happening. They are freaking the fuck out. That is freak out. Politicians would be all over the airwaves going after the Russians if this weren't the serious, most fucking serious fucking thing going. So anyway, we need to grow up and have a grown-up discussion, and we're never going to have that with people like Pelosi, McConnell, Schumer, McCarthy, and Donald Trump, and Joe Biden in leadership. I have no hope that any of them will do anything properly going forward. Just like in the last century, Woodrow Wilson, who somehow ended up on a dime. Is he on the dime, or is that Franklin Roosevelt on the dime? Is Wilson on? Or is that Wilson on the? I think Wilson's on the dime. I don't remember. Anyway, fuck if I know. Who the hell uses dimes anymore anyway? But anyway, Wilson was considered an important president. I think he's one of the biggest motherfuckers in U.S. history, a real piece of shit. Let's also remember that during his term in 1913, the income tax, the beginning of socialism in the United States and the confiscation of private property, because what is more property than your income, began with that motherfucker as well. Okay, Anyway, I could go on and on about Woodrow Wilson, but this is not the history podcast. This is the Radical Reset. Before you go, make sure that you click on the notification button and the subscriber button. Make sure, most of all, that you share the Radical Reset with your friends, because we have a unique point of view that America is going to need as the shit hits the fan in the coming days, which it will, as sure as God made little green apples. If you would like to become active in the movement, text Antipolitism to the number above, and I will get back to you promptly, and we can find out ways to work together. We are but in the nascent stage of Antipolitism, but when the shit hits the fan, we'll go from crawling to running very, very fast, and I need you and want you to be a part of it. Please join the movement. And with that, I thank you very much. Can't speak English. Very much. And until next time, this is your pal, E.H. Ivins, signing off.